matte is a compact metal product like cathodes. And so it's got to be harder to leach than, a concentrate or a powder or a mixed hydroxide precipitate out of hydrometallurgical facilities. Is matte really going to be a preferred product for making nickel sulfate?
I don't think so. I think the nickel sulfate producers that I'm aware of, the big ones in Taiwan, the big ones in Japan, the big ones in Korea, and I know some of them in China, they have fairly rudimentary flow sheets. They have a lot of sophisticated equipment downstream after the nickel is in solution to purify it, to get that pure nickel sulfate, pure cobalt sulfate that the precursor manufacturers want. For them, though, it's all about how fast can I get the nickel into solution. I know one nickel dissolver in Japan, they use nickel briquettes. They use sulfuric acid. They have an agitated tank, and they add a little bit of temperature. And really, they measure their performance on how quickly they can get nickel units into solution. If you introduce matte now, as you say, which is a metal, but it's also got some other impurities, and you've got a higher iron content in it, you're going to have to probably have a longer retention time, or you're going to have to start introducing pressure because your temperature is getting higher. And we see that with matte refineries that are currently refining matte, such as BHP and Kwinana. You've got pressure vessels. Right. Or you've got a chloride leach system like you have at Nickelwork in Norway, which that introduces a new dynamic. How do you deal with the chlorine before you produce your nickel sulfate? So I don't believe that all of the nickel sulfate producers that are using dissolving right now will convert to matte. What they will do is they'll look for somebody who's taking the matte, precipitating a crude nickel sulfate or crude nickel oxide or crude nickel something, and then they'll redissolve it. So they're going to introduce another step. And I do know one thing from the battery manufacturers, especially the nickel sulfate producers. Right now, if you look at pricing for nickel sulfate, it's also measured in 100 parts per billion magnetic material. So nickel sulfate that is desirable for cathode manufacturer, precursor manufacturer, has to be extremely pure. And I spoke to one manufacturer who was buying nickel briquettes, and they said, they watch the iron content extremely closely because iron costs money to remove, as does zinc, which is interesting. Historically, nickel briquette producers, they were more worried about sulfur because the stainless industry didn't want sulfur. They couldn't care less about the iron in there. They were adding it to iron. Right. So you've got two consumers now for the same product that have diametrically opposite requirements for impurities. So if you're a nickel briquette producer, you can make a choice to have a high sulfur product and low iron, or you can have a low sulfur product or high iron, or you can have both. It depends on your chemistry. But when you start introducing a high iron product to the battery manufacturers, they're going to have to do something to remove that iron for them to be able to use it.